Hello. Today I'll be covering the Lightning Component Framework, and more specifically, tags. My name's David Zamora, and I'll be your instructor for this lesson. So we're going to start off by looking at the building blocks. Let's start by reviewing the basic tags of the Lightning Component Framework. Now here are the list of the available tags. Now I've highlighted the first one on the list, and there's probably about 13 on this page. We're going to look at the Aura attribute types and also the Aura application and component. Actually, it's going to be by accident because we have to use those two tags to accomplish our Aura attribute types demo. So an Aura attribute specifically provides a way to save values that change and a way to name those value placeholders. They're like membership variables in an Apex class that basically enable you to make components more dynamic. What? Wait, what? Member variables, values, placeholders, huh? Okay. What I'm trying to do is set this presentation up for beginners, so I've got to start off with the basics. So let me give you an example. The Aura attribute provides a way to save values that change. Okay, that's cool. And name those value placeholders. So there's two things that it enables us to do, right? Save values and name the value placeholders. Again, save values and name the value placeholders. That's it, really. It's just a tag that enables us to do these things. So here's an example. Let's start off with the basic understanding. And I'm using this example basically if I were packing my stuff and getting ready to move. So I go off and I get my boxes. Obviously, I'm very organized and I need to have everything in boxes and labeled. So I'm going to go out and get boxes for my bathroom, my office, and my kitchen. And so I've got all these boxes, and now I need to put stuff in my boxes, okay? Now specifically, let's look at kitchen boxes. So by definition, only one type of thing can go in a box. So in this case, I'm looking at the things in my kitchen, and I'm looking at specifically knives. Kitchen knives, I'm going to call that a placeholder. And I could put knives in my 4 boxes that I've got. But it turns out that by definition, I can only put one type in each box. So I'm not saying that I can't put one or more than one knife in each box. It's the type of knife that goes in each box. Okay? So this is just an example. And what I'm trying to build here is an array. And if you look at it, I'll say it this way. This is an array of kitchen knives. There's 4 elements within the array, or 4 boxes. Okay, got it? Also, as I'm getting and starting to pack, I start to realize, you know something? I don't want to pack individual things. What I'm going to do is get a big box called silverware, and I'll put stuff in it, right? For example, I've got my big box of silverware. I put my spoon, a knife, and I'm going to toss in the 4 kitchen knives that I had in the previous slide. And then I'm going to toss another box in there that only contains a spoon and a knife. And I'm going to bring that into one big box called silverware. Okay? I'm going to show you a little bit about this example later on, right before we do our demo, because it's really important and it's going to tie right into an object in Salesforce. Okay, fine. But listen, Lightning doesn't have a clue about knives or spoons or whatever. Instead, it has its own defined types, not knives or spoons, I guarantee you that. So let's take a look at the basic types. All right, here's a chart. Basic types. So on the left-hand side, or left column, I've got the types highlighted in red and a short description of what that type is. So, for example, a boolean. We all know what a boolean is, right? True or false. We all definitely know what a date is. But did you know that the type requires a specific format. So it's YYY-MM-DD, which is year, month, and date. The HHMMSS portion of the date is not stored, which means hour, minutes, and seconds. So essentially, it's just the date portion of the date without time. Now there's another one right below that, which is the date and time that corresponds to a timestamp that does have the date and time included. Below that is a decimal. A decimal contains fractional portions, and it's more preferable to use decimals for currency fields. And then there's another one that's very similar, is a double. Although doubles have larger values that you can store within it, but it's still the same thing, sorta. Now an integer, of course, it's basically a whole number. A long can be used in an integer, and again, a long is similar to an integer, but it can hold larger value. And a string, well, obviously a string is just a sequence of characters. Kind of easy, right? So here we are. We don't have knives or spoons of the types in Lightning components. They have their own defined types, and these are called basic types. The reason we're going through this is because these basic types are the fundamental building blocks of building Lightning components, and you've got to understand these building blocks before we can move on to talk about the aura attribute tag. Okay? And I think this is pretty self-explanatory. We use this every day. When we talk in maybe true or false, dates, decimals, strings. We're familiar with that, right? So let's go back to our placeholder we were calling kitchen knives. If I were to talk about kitchen knives in the sense of a Boolean, I would basically say, all right, well, let's say that box number 1 has a knife. Or does it have a knife? And you would say true. It does have a knife. Look over at box number 2. The question would be, does it have a knife? False, meaning no. And 3 would be true and 4 would be false. And that's kind of how we would frame this placeholder against this array. So this is how we would write it out. We would first type out the aura attribute tag, the starter, the head beginning tag. I'd type in access equals public. Name equals a Boolean array of kitchen knives. I'm just typing all that out. The type, of course, is Boolean. And you notice the 2 brackets. That means an array. Okay? If you don't include that, then it's just a single Boolean type. Not a series of Booleans, but just one. The name of this attribute called Boolean array of kitchen knives kind of tells you what type we're going to be. Now, for the name, I could have chosen anything I wanted to. But I decided, hey, look, you know what, for this example, I'm just going to type out Boolean array of kitchen knives. I'm just going to call it what it is. And the default, I'm going to add some values. And I'll show you. So I've added some defaults. These defaults to my attribute kind of correspond to what's up in the top right-hand corner of true, false, true, false. I'm going to follow that up by an element called required equals false. And then an element called description. And I just typed in placeholder for Boolean array of kitchen knives. Exactly what it is. Then I'll close the tag. So there you have it. This is an aura attribute tag. I want to point out that there's 2 things that are highlighted in orange on my screen, and that's the access element and the required element. Well, it turns out that access is actually, the default is public. It's not necessary to include it because the default is public. The Lightning component framework already understands that. So in the next slide, I'm going to remove access. And again, I'm going to move down to where it says required equals false. Required equals false. False is the default. So I don't really need to include it either. So again, on the next screen, I'm going to go just get rid of it. Now, if I were to change access to make it private, then I'd have to spell that out and say access equals private. Or if access is global, I would have to say access equals global. Okay, and the same is true for required. If I really, really want this field to be required, I would actually spell it out and say required equals true because true is not the default. False is. That makes sense? Okay, let's move on. So now let's look at basic types. So now let's look at another type. And this is date. Again, let's go back to our example of kitchen knives, which is a placeholder, and my 4 boxes. Now inside each box, I'm going to have a date. If I were to open up the box and I'd look inside it, all I would see is a date. So in this case, it's pretty easy. The dates are formatted by year, month, and date. And forget the hours, minutes, and seconds portion because that's not included in date. So let's write out the tag. We'll start off by the Aura attribute open tag. And notice I didn't include access. So the name of this is date array of kitchen knives. And the type is date. And here are the default values. Okay, the default values correspond to the ones up on the top right hand corner of the screen. And I'll put a description in there. And I'll close the tag. The Aura attribute does have a place for a description. Don't get lazy and leave it blank. Use it. You might not need it, but later on somebody that's going to look at your code is going to want to understand why you created this attribute. And so be kind. Take your time. Don't rush. Put a description in there for the next person coming along. Okay, so again, this is a date and time example of our placeholder called kitchen knives. So again, if I were to open up a box, look inside it, I would have this time I would have something inside there called a date and time, which obviously includes the time. And let's take a look at the tag. So let's open, and we're going to create the open tag of our attribute. The name is a date time array. Now, again, date time array of kitchen knives. Now, I could have called this Mickey Mouse. It really doesn't matter, but doesn't that make sense to look at the name and try to figure out what this attribute is all about? It says date time array of kitchen knives. So we're looking at kitchen knives. All right, so the type, date and time. 2 little brackets mean it's an array, and we can see that on the screen. It's array. There's 4 elements in this array. The default, and you'll notice that the default for these actually have the date, capital T for time, and then the time spelled out, and at the very end there's a little Z. Okay? Again, the description and the close tag. All right. So are you getting the hang of this? Really, it's kind of simple, right? Now let's go look at my placeholder called kitchen knives. And now it's either going to be a decimal or a double. They're kind of the same in this example. Only the reason I say they're the same is because I can use fractional portions to the right of the decimal. So in this case, I'm looking at our 4 boxes, and the first box, I could say something like, okay, first box is worth $2.50. So I put all my knives in that box, and I'm going to tag it. I'm going to say this box is worth $2.50. The next one, I want to say it's worth $300. The third, let's say 60, and the last one is $99.99. And it could be anything. I mean, but I'm using currency in this example. Okay, so let's see this. How are we going to write this out? Start off with the Aura attribute tag, the open tag. The name is a decimal array of kitchen knives. You guys are catching on now. Decimal array of kitchen knives. The type is decimal. The default values. Now, let me highlight this. That you don't necessarily have to have a default for your Aura attribute, but for this example and this lesson, I'm using default values because later on, when we go into the demo, we're just going to bring these default values up and paint them to the screen for you. And let's follow this up with the description. All right, cool. Let's go on to the second to the last there. So now again, let's look at our placeholder called kitchen knives. The first box is a whole number, 2. I could say something like this box weighs 2 pounds. and the third box weighs 300 pounds, the third is 60 pounds, and the last one is 99 pounds. I guess you guys are getting the hang of this. So to write this out, I'm going to start the open tag for the aura attribute. The name is an integer array of kitchen knives. Okay, I'm using integer and not long for this example. I could have used long. The type is an integer. The default values, of course, you can see up on the top right-hand side of the screen, but I'll spell those out. The description tag and the close tag. And the last one is a string. So again, looking at our kitchen knives placeholder, I've got my 4 boxes and I'm putting stuff in there. I decided to put knives in the first box, and these are long knives. I'm just going to call them long knife. One knife goes in that box by definition. The next box is a small knife. The third box is a dull knife. The fourth one, I'll call it a broken dagger. In any case, we've got strings that represent the values that are going into these boxes. So to write out the tag, we'll create an aura attribute open tag. We'll call the name, this is a string array of kitchen knives, and you guys are getting the hang of this. So it's a string array with brackets that's showing me that it is an array. The default values, and you'll notice that I have my long, comma, small knife, comma, dull blade, comma, broken dagger as the string that it's going to compose my array. And of course, the description and the close tag. All right, so that covers the array, but let's talk about just singular. I'm not talking about many items, but just one. So looking at my kitchen placeholder, instead of knives, I've got a kitchen knife, singular, one box. And in this case, I'm putting just long knife in that box. So to do that, my aura attribute name, I'm just going to call it string kitchen knife, for lack of a better word. And the type is string. Notice that there's no square brackets around it. This is one and only one string. And the default value is long knife. That's it. It's very simple. And I'm holding one value, and that's it. All right. So we've been through all this, and let's quickly recap before we jump into a demo. So the first one we created was a Boolean array of kitchen knives by using the Boolean type. The second one was a date array, date and time array, decimal array, integer array, string array, and finally the last one, which was a single example, was just a string of just a kitchen knife. Very simple, very cool, and now we're starting to use some of the types. Remember, I've cleared out spoon, fork, and knife on the right-hand side. Now we're using the Lightning Component framework to basically tell me what type of value we're going to be using. Now, so far I've talked about basic types, but there are other types. And for example, in basic types, we had things like Boolean, string, decimal, date, integers, so on and so forth. There are others that are called object. There's another one called standard and custom object. No, wait a second. Whoa, standard and custom object? Hey, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, yeah, it could be. For example, a standard object in Salesforce could be an account object, or a custom object that you might create, like expenses _ C as an example. Those are very well known to you, probably, standard and custom objects. All right, and we got the third one here called collection types. And these types can be of array, list, map, or set. Now, in some of the other videos, so looking at collection types, we've already been using array. But you how to use collection types of a list, map, or a set. Then we'll be talking about custom Apex classes as types, and later we'll be talking about framework specific types. Now those will come in some of my later videos, but for today, we're going to be covering basic types. Now, do you remember the slide here just a minute ago? I was talking about kitchen knives and taking one big box and putting a collection of other boxes into it, which is basically outlined on the left-hand side. Now I want to kind of draw the parallel between what I was trying to explain and what the left-hand side of the screen means relative to the right-hand side of the screen. So in Salesforce, I think you're very familiar with what a contact is. So a contact has a name, which I can relate. Have a phone number, which I can relate that back to knife. Then it has a related list of opportunities, which the related list, I'm kind of relating that back to my moving example, which are kitchen knives. And I could have a contact, in a sense, could have 4 opportunities, whereas in my kitchen example, I had 4 knives. Okay? Now right below that, accounts through contacts would be a basic lookup up to the account, but I can have one, remember by definition, one type. I can have my account and then account name, account status, etc., 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 etc. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because later on in my subsequent videos that I'm going to be showing you, like, I don't know, part 3 or part 4, I haven't designed that yet, we're going to be talking about this. So I kind of wanted to just bring this up so that you can be exposed now, and then later we'll talk about it. All right, it's demo time. So here we are. We're inside the Salesforce Developer Console in my Developer Edition. So I'm going to start creating our components. The first one I'm going to create is a Lightning app component, and it's essentially going to be the placeholder or the big box, if you will, that we're going to toss in our smaller boxes, which is going to be our components. So to do that, you go up to File, New, Lightning Application, and I'll call it Basic Type App. The description. Basic Type App Demo. All right, great. Cool. You'll notice that immediately just upon creation, it's created a tag for us. This is one of our tags that I had talked about earlier. This is the Aura Applications tag. Now, for now, I'm just going to go up to File and save this. Next, we're going to go to New, Lightning Component. I'll clear this out. Instead of Basic Type App, I'm going to go call it Basic Type Viewer. This is actually the actual component. And let's get rid of this. All right. We got our basic description in there. And what I want to do is, I'm going to show you here in a minute. I'm going to make sure that this component that we're creating can be used on a tab, a page, and a record. If I wanted to, I could actually make it available to a Lightning community page. But in this case, I'm going to just unselect that and click on Submit. Voila. Now you'll notice that it's created the tag for us, the Aura tag component. And the selections we made on the previous screen are here. These were the little checkboxes for record tab and application. Okay, if you're wondering what those are for. Okay, so now that we've created our component, I'm going to copy and paste some values from our examples that we previously built. But one thing you'll notice that I've placed the Aura attribute, instead of being formatted on several lines, it's all on one line now. And I've indented the types so that you can see those and the default values. And I'll scroll over to the right. You can see my descriptions. Now in real life, really, I don't think you would spend the time to format your things like this, but for the sake of this demo, I'm going to format them that way. All right, great. So now let's do something. It's kind of cool. We're going to bring in our values. And I'm going to do a copy paste. There's quite a few of them. But let's go over these. All right. My first one are going to be the booleans, which are our array of booleans. It's going to be an iteration. I'm going to start an iteration and go through each value of the array. And I'm going to use a paragraph tag here to actually paint this value to the screen. Make sense? Now, in reality, you would probably see something like this. Okay, now does that make more sense? I'm going to iterate through the Aura iteration tag. And for each value in my Boolean array of kitchen knives, I'm going to put this in right here. So this is the variable called A. But I thought it'd be much easier for this demo to just put everything on one line so that you can see that all on one screen. Makes sense? So what we're going to do is we're going to do the Boolean, go through dates, date and time, decimals, integers, and strings. Looks good. All right, so now we have one thing left to do. I'll do a quick save all. I'm going to come back to my app. And in my app, I'm going to refer to my basic type spell viewer, Dave. Okay. And now what I'm doing, as I mentioned earlier, the Aura attribute tag, I'm going to use it as a placeholder or a suitcase. This is my big box. And I'm going to put the component that we just developed inside it. Does that make sense? And to do that, we use a tag with a C colon and the name of the component. And do a save all. Everything's good to go. Awesome. Now on the right hand side, you'll notice the little preview button. I'm going to click that. And off we go. Voila. So here we are. We've got our tags here. There's my booleans, my dates, my date and times, my decimals. And you're looking at this and going, oh, well, really, Dave? This doesn't look cool. Doesn't look formatted. It's horrible. And you're right, it really is. But the whole idea here is being able to paint these default values back to the screen. So let's doll this up a little bit. What I want to do, so I'll go back to my developer console. And in my application, I'm going to add a new element called extends the force SLDS. What that means is that I'm going to actually include the Salesforce Lightning Design Style Sheet and do it so just to make it look a little nicer. So I'll do a save all. Click on the right update preview button. And there you have it. Now the font looks different. You're like, okay, whoa, that's cool. My fonts look different. Well, that's just we're just going to start there. So that's great. What I want to do now is take what we've done so far, and I want to create another section. I'll go back to the developer console. I want to develop another section here right below, and I want to add some styles. So what I will do is I'm going to grab the same thing up here, I'm going to paste it, but this time my tag's below. I have a class referred to it called PH for placeholder. And I'm using something different now. I'm using a UI tag. And the output box, or it's an output checkbox for the booleans. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to format the value on the screen. Earlier we were just painting the values to the screen. In this section here, I'll do a couple, is essentially a duplicate of the top section, which we just saw, by the way. But now I'm doing some formatting. For dates, I'm going to use the UI output or date tag and the UI output date time tag. And for decimal, I'm going to use the UI output currency tag. So I'm going to format the values a little differently. Now, the class over here, PH, I want to style it a little differently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to styles on the right hand side, click on that. I'm going to replace what's there with this. So what I'm doing is saying that the tag called, or the class called PH, I want the color to be blue and the background to be white smoke. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll save all again. Click on the basic tab, type app. Click on update preview on the right hand side of the screen. And there you have it. Notice below that my booleans are now in checkboxes. My dates, well, kind of cool. My dates are formatted differently. If you recall, we had to do the year, month, and date to describe our basic item type. But now down here, I've actually formatted it. Cool? Well, not really. It's just not well organized, is it? So let me do something here. I'm going to introduce you to another concept. Go back to the developer console, and I'm going to click on I'm going to add another tag. Very top. And this is just a value that I'm going to be using as a placeholder for a boolean. So this thing here is going to be format knives type, true or false. Scroll down here. And what I'm saying here with this, what I just typed in or pasted in, is that if the format knives value is true, then I want you to do this portion of the screen. Okay. Now I'm going to paste this value. Here's my else. Else, I want you to do the rest. I'll scroll down to the end. Do a Control A, Shift, and Tab. All right. So this value, I'm saying that if it's true, I want you to do this half. If it's false, I want you to do this half. So essentially what I'm doing is this portion here is formatting it with the currencies, the output dates and times and checkboxes. Otherwise, if it's false, it's going to do this portion here. Okay, so that sounds cool. So you guys remember that I don't have to include the default type for a Boolean. So the default type for a Boolean is false. Okay. So now let's go ahead and save all and view our viewer. And we should see either this section, which is the unformatted section, or we should see this section, which is the formatted section. Okay. I click on my app tab, go, refresh, and lo and behold, I've got the formatted section. Cool. All right. That's easy enough. So now I've introduced something. I've actually introduced several things here. One, I've introduced an expression, an if expression that we can use by, again, creating a value. Remember what Aura attributes do for you from our slides? Aura attributes can save values that change and provide you a way to create a placeholder name for that. So, again, the Aura attribute that I have highlighted on the screen is for format knives, and the type is Boolean. The value can change. Great. And the name is called format knives. Cool. So far, so good. All right. Awesome. So now what I want to do is also show you I introduced my formatting here of colors, which is cool. All right. This is great. So here we're going to do something kind of cool. Well, my section down here, I'm going to replace this. I'm going to put some actual classes in here from the SLDS. We're going to try to format this since we've activated the SLDS just a second ago by extending it. Now what I want to do is actually put some classes in here and see if it changes. I'll click on Save All. Click on the app. On the right hand side, I'm going to click on Update Preview. And now we've formatted this by using Lightning Design tags. It looks different, doesn't it? Like, okay, sweet, Dave. Cool. Well, that's not all. Let's go back to our console. And let's go back to our app. You notice how this basic viewer, we've created a value called Format Knives. What I'd like to do is show you something really cool. I'm going to pass in a value to this component we created. Okay? I'm going to pass in true and see what happens. Save all. Click on Update Preview. And nothing's really formatted. And you're like, what? Okay, that's cool. No worries. Let's go back and change it and see what happens. And I'm going to make this false. Click on Save All. Let's go back and view it again. Hey, look at that. Now it's formatted. So here's my point with this little exercise is that I can pass in a value that's an Aura attribute tag. Remember, Aura attribute tags do two things for you. They say values that change, and they provide you a way to name the value placeholder. So we created that attribute tag to store this Boolean value called format knives. And we're passing false into that viewer. Sound cool? Pretty easy, huh? All right. One last thing before we wrap up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste into my application a basic template that I use. And this template, it's got all kinds of stuff in it. You don't need to be concerned with any of that, but two things. I have two sections in this template. One's basically dividing the page into two. I've got a left-hand side and a right-hand side. And I'll show you that in a minute. On the left-hand side of my template, I'm going to create a component of the basic viewer type, and I'm going to pass in true to the value format knives. All right, cool. That's pretty easy, right? We just did all this work just to do that. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, I'm going to pass in, or actually instantiate a component basic type viewer. And the value is now, I'm going to pass in false. So let's see what this does for us. I'm going to do a save all, update preview. And guess what? Here's my header that I use depending on which record type I'm creating. On the left-hand side of the screen are the unformatted values. And on the right-hand side of the screen are the formatted values. Now, the reason I did this is so that you could see what formatting did for us. Remember, the basic type dictated that we use year, month, and date. And so now that when we paint that back to the screen, it's the same year, month, and date. But we don't want that. We want it to look friendlier. And this is what I did, is I formatted using the UI date component. And now it looks different. And the same thing goes for our times. And just because we format it, now it's given us a different time, or date and time, excuse me. For our decimals, we just had a simple value. Like when we wanted to use currency, I used a UI output currency tag. And I was able to format that as a currency. And the rest I just didn't bother with it. I didn't change it. So that's it, really, folks. So we've covered a lot. We've covered our basic types. We're using booleans, date time, decimal, integers, doubles, strings, arrays, and I've shown you an example and formatted it different ways on the screen. So what I want you to do, this is going to be your building block. Take this and start building on it, playing with it. You might want to look at your styles and attributes, your formatting, change things around, but it's really kind of cool. And now this is all client side. We haven't done any controllers yet. This is all done on the essentially the component side. In my next video, what I'm going to do is we're going to dive in a little bit deeper and start using helpers and some of the controllers to control some of this stuff using Java. And it's really easy. I'm going to show you how to make a call to the database to Salesforce. It's going to be an Apex call, actually. And we're going to pull back some data. Let's say like an opportunity record. And we're going to do the same thing, is going to paint that sucker back to the screen and show you some of the things you can do with it. But for now, this is it. Thank you very much and have a good day.